Hey guys, how you doing? This is JP Saricolia. Welcome again to another episode of Age of Heroes, my podcast. And before we get into the podcast, into the subject of the day, I want to thank every person that supports this channel. I want to thank those that support me through Patreon, every person that has subscribed to the channel. Every time you leave a comment, it really pushes me to do more and to try new things. And having a conversation is always phenomenal. Definitely like doing YouTube stuff. Sometimes it's a bit It's a bit lonely because you have to come up with ideas and trying to figure it out if that works or not. So when you leave your comments, when you leave your feedback, it really helps out for me to understand what needs to change and what needs to improve. So I thank you for that. Thank you for just conversing and discussing things and listening to what I have to say. But now, going into the subject of the day, now that we finish in the week, we coming at the end of the week. Of course, everybody enjoys the weekend. I personally do. Time to spend with the family and do all sort of things. But I want to talk about something that I've been thinking for quite some time. Something that probably you have part of it you know, and is the importance of evolution, the need of evolution, and for any franchise to evolve, to change, to transform with the times, to move, to grow. It's extremely important for any franchises, for any pop culture franchise, whether it's DC, Marvel, Star Wars, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Ghostbusters, or any other pop culture franchise to evolve, to change. It's extremely necessary because with that growth, with that evolution, they can stay relevant. The relevancy of a franchise depends a lot on the times. Depends on that time, on that era where they came to be. When you go back and look at a lot of the franchises on the 80s, there were a lot of franchises that I loved dearly. Unfortunately, some of those franchises got stuck in the 80s and they haven't evolved into something different. Some have tried, but they have failed because they're not as marketable for today's, society of today's culture, particularly younger audiences. They're the ones that revitalize any franchise. You're talking about franchises like in this case, the Thundercats, for example, which I love very dearly. I'm a Thundercats fan. But Thundercats didn't grow beyond that. Yes, you have still a very strong, following. You used to have very faithful and fervent fans. But beyond that, you don't see movies, you don't see newer cartoons. Yeah, we have some cartoons that were not that bad not long ago, but they didn't last that long because there's no market for it. There's no interest. And some franchises, they have a hard time evolving with the time. Some franchises are being smart about it. You have like Marvel. Marvel has always been smart about things because they knew that comics will not be the only place for them to grow. And that was a vision that Stan Lee had, that it was a great, he was a great visionary. He understood the importance of moving with the times from the comic, from the print, into television, into video games and all of that. So he was able to move that to the big screen, move all of that. That was his vision, that was his intent. Even back in the day in the 90s, when a lot of people didn't believe that comic book heroes could make the big leap of faith into something totally different, it was an unknown territory, but he was able to push that. And of course, we got a lot of crappy stuff back then in the 90s, a lot of movies that were not that great. But definitely nowadays, we are enjoying the benefits of someone that really had a vision, had a dream for something bigger. And we also see that with DC. We have some great movies from DC, and everything starts with a vision. Somebody decides to move with the times and move from the comic book into the reality of television, video games, and the big screen. And of course, the rest is history. So every franchise needs to evolve. Every franchise needs to move forward, and that's something that is not as easy to do, particularly when there's a crowded market. We have so many franchises competing with each other. So in order to stay relevant, you have to stay with the times. I'm bringing this to the attention because I've been thinking about, of course, in the last couple of days, of course, the last couple of months, there's been talks. I've seen a lot of videos and people talking, and I've seen some articles online where people are asking the question, what's next after Avengers Endgame? What's the game plan after that? What's going to happen next? And there's a lot of unknowns in regards to it. We don't really know exactly what Avengers Endgame will finalize. We know it's the end of Phase 3. And we start Phase 4, and some unconsidered. I think in this case, Far From Home, Spider-Man Far From Home is going to be the beginning of that phase, and we know that. We know that there is another Black Panther movie on the pipeline. There's been, in this week, there's been a bit of talks about, in regards to the Guardians of the Galaxy. We don't know exactly what's going to happen. We know, because of Captain Marvel, that there is going to be probably we're gonna initiate a new sequel, or in this case a new story arc, going into the Galactic Wars. You see the Kree, you see of course the all these wars that are happening. We know that it's going to be a secret invasion part of as well of the story with Captain Marvel. So we're gonna know that they're going on that route. So things are gonna get bigger. Not only with Thanos, but everything else that comes after Thanos, which is good, because I'm a big fan of the in this case the Galactic Wars, of course, the Inhumans, the battles between the Kree and the rest of the characters. Of course, the X-Men has been involved in the Galactic Wars. Everyone in the Marvel Universe has been involved in the Galactic Wars. So there's going to be the Skrulls, which definitely I love the storylines with the Skrulls and battling the Kree and of course Inhumans and all of that. So I geek out when I think about the possibilities, but it's definitely, as we know, there is something bigger there. Now there is a risk. Once you go bigger into the Secret Wars, you might lose a little bit of reality, because a lot of these superhero stories started with the reality of simple heroes defending humanity. Defending the human race. Captain America, even Thor, who is in love with humanity, he loves humanity. Iron Man, who defends humanity. So once you go into the Galactic Wars, you're talking about defending other planets and other worlds. So there's going to be an evolution in that direction. Not necessarily means that it's going to be the greatest thing for some, because it's once you start going into, and that's something that happens with the comics, when you go into Galactic Wars, you kind of lose a little bit of reality, and that's something that has happened with the comic books, because this big story arcs that happened, and there's something bigger and bigger and bigger, and in reality the superheroes that started just a very down-to-earth superheroes become like bigger than life superheroes. But that's something that we will know for sure when the time comes. For the time being, it's good to speculate. And it's fun to speculate about what the future will bring for the Marvel Universe. But yeah, there is an evolution that we already can see that is happening within, franchise. Now, the DC is no stranger to that either. We know with DC that there is also an evolution. Of course, now that we know that, that Ben Affleck is moving away from his role as the Batman, there is the open space for a new Batman. And of course, many actors are calling out and say, "Hey, I'm here. I'm ready. I want to be the Batman." Of course, we don't know what Warner Brothers is going to decide in the end. We know, of course, that the direction of the movie, they're going to go in more in the direction of the detective, the greatest detective of the world, which is, of course, Batman. So they're going in that direction, a more darker noir feel. So it kind of going back a little bit into the roots of course, the Nolan trilogy, which is my favorite Batman story of all times, movie-wise. But definitely they're going in that route, but they're going to emphasize the detective skills. So we'll see what's going to happen. Of course, that evolution with DC. Aquaman did great. I love Aquaman. The real Captain Marvel, which is Shazam. It's coming, later this year, which I'm very interested, very pumped for it. So there's a lot of things. You see an evolution on the stories. They're going back a little in time, in order to kind of bring forward what they have envisioned now. So this is good. I think that there's a lot of good things happening for DC. And they're taking their time with it, which is good. So there's an evolution in that sense. They realize that people are moving forward from the years ago. Years ago, like a lot of the movies that we had, superhero movies in the 90s, early 2000s, a lot of those movies were really cheesy. It was more about entertainment. It was fun. They were great popcorn films. But the audience has matured. And because they have matured in their expectations of superhero stories, like you see Black Panther now fighting for Best Picture, Motion Picture of 2018 at the Oscars. So there is now an expectation. People are expecting great storytelling. They want great stories. bigger than life stories that have a message. They are profound. They're deep. So, this is something that, now companies like DC is really realizing that they need to go deeper, not necessarily abstract deep, like Snyder did. He wanted to be too abstract in his portrayal of these characters, and not, really grounded on reality. So because of that, of course, a lot of people, they didn't like the approach. Not necessarily doesn't mean that Snyder is a bad cinematographer, because he is great in his visuals. He's fantastic. But definitely his story-wise, his storytelling is not the greatest. And he falter on that. Of course, now, you see that there is a change in DC. You also see this with Star Wars. I love Star Wars, the newer stuff. I know that this is in the minority. A lot of the fans are pretty much, they hate the new Star Wars. Of course, right now it's like you love or you hate Star Wars. It's just, that's the way it is. There's no middle ground. But I grew up with the originals, and I'm okay with the newer stuff. I find them interesting. I find them that it is the right approach. It's hard to really, you cannot compare Star Wars with superhero stories. They're totally different in their making. Superhero stories like Marvel or DC are stories centered, they're character oriented. They're character center. They're center, and they go around, they circle around these characters, are bigger than life, and you create a story around the character. Now, in this case, that they're character driven. Now, when you look at Star Wars, it's story driven. It's about a story that is evolving. It's a series of stories are evolving into a bigger picture of a story. It's kind of like the story of humanity. It changes. So it's different because the characters have to die. They have to, and a new generation has to, rise up. And that's something that is different to comprehend for a lot of people. But that was the way it was set up from the beginning. And it's always going to be that way. If you want to change that, if you want to make characters like the Jedis, being bigger than life, then you have to kind of see them from the perspective of comic book stories, which is totally different. They were set up that way from the beginning. That was the vision of George Lucas, and that's the way it has been. And, unfortunately, that's the way it is. For some, but for me, it's a story which I love. I love the different variations of Star Wars and the evolution of the time, and how this, because it's the stories of the galactic wars in a far away, galaxy. So it's something that we have to always keep in mind. But of course, Star Wars also needs that evolution, and it needs to change with the times. And sometimes there are growing pains. Sometimes there's some things that work out, and sometimes things don't work out. The same that happens with superhero stories. But you see that with Ghostbusters. I know that there's been a lot of hate. That I have a video where I talk about, what some of the, the cast of the previous Ghostbusters were upset about, but some of the members there. But at the end of the day, Ghostbusters also needs that evolution. You need to stay relevant. So they have to evolve this storyline into something totally different. It didn't work out as well for many. The previous Ghostbusters movie, of course, this is going in a new direction. And perhaps this is something that really works out better for everyone. But, it needs to evolve. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, I love the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, but also there needs an evolution. The previous movies, the most recent movies, they were okay. They were, they had the Michael Bay feel because Michael Bay was a producer there, even though he was not directing, but he's still a producer. So it's his vision plastered into the film, which to me, it missed the point of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, because I love the dark tone and the very noir tone of the original comics, which I need to review at some point. But I love that, and that was transferred into the first movie, which in my opinion, it was the best, and as to this day, is the best Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And of course, the other movies kind of lose that, but because of the cartoons, because of the video game, because all of that, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles had different iterations, different versions throughout the time, but they have stayed relevant. I can ask my 6-7-year-old nephew, and he knows where the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are. Those are some of his favorite, figures, because he sees he watches the cartoons, he loves the characters. So you have to stay relevant. You have to move with the times. What I mean by all of this in this video, it is important to always keep that in mind. When we keep that in mind, we can also have enjoyment and enjoy these franchises for what they are, pure entertainment. Sometimes we hold dearly a lot of things like secret, like it was a sacred religion. And for some people it is, and I'm not here against you really defending the honor of the past, of the things that you do, because I do that too. I love the classic stuff. I love classic comic books. I love classic cartoons. I love anything that resembles the original stories. I love when there is, movies play homage to that. Like, for example, we saw with the new Transformers movie, Bumblebee, which I review already. I love how it plays homage to the originals, but at the same time, it's trying to retrace things into a new direction. Trying to make a new stand for the future for newer generations. And I believe that that's the approach that, it has to be given to all these franchises. We can stay angry and we can stay bitter about the changes, and we can die being angry about it, feeling that we were, something was taken away from us, or we can just simply enjoy the process and the evolution of it. Yes, there's going to be lemons in the process. There's going to be a lot of things that are sour, a lot of things that don't add up. But eventually things change and go back, because sometimes people, I see the battles, people are battling about something, all of a sudden something is rebooted again. And you're going to see all these reboots over time and time again. People didn't like Batman. People went crazy about, didn't like Ben Affleck's version. Some people loved it. Some people, it was very polarized. But ultimately, he's out of the picture, and now it's a new Batman coming. We don't know when, but we know it's coming. So it's going to be a new version of Batman, and that's going to last for another generation, for 5 years or whatever. And then the next one will come until Kingdom Come. You'll see those differences. So we have to enjoy what it is. I think, and I was listening to some people online saying this, which I totally understand. I totally agree with. This generation that we live in now, this young generation, I'm talking about my generation. I'm talking about the people in their early, their kids, children, in their teens and their early 20s. They don't know how good they have it, because they have grown in a generation where all of this is possible. They have grown watching this movie since they were babies. They have seen all the superheroes movies. In my generation, we didn't have that. We dreamed that we were able to see this day, or at least the possibility of it. I remember I wanted to see that visually, like Spider-Man jumping from building to building, because I see it in my head, when I was reading the comics and the art of some of the greatest artists of the time. I love the art. I love how vivacious, how lively it was. I love like Eric Larson's art in the comics, particularly how I felt that it was so alive, the jumping. I wanted to see it visually, and, I saw it in my head as a kid reading the comics, but I never thought in my wildest dreams that I will ever get to see it in, visually on television, in a movie, in a theater, and also in video games like the Spider-Man video game, which is phenomenal, the newer for the PS4. But there's been all the games before that. But just to see that, the entirety of New York City, how everything has been put together, it's just amazing. We live in an amazing times, and sometimes all we do is get, like old people get all disgruntled about it and upset about it, because we're looking back at the, at the old wine, and we say, oh, the old wine was better than the new wine. But believe me, you have to enjoy life. You have to enjoy the new wine. You have to enjoy the new things. And once you find that enjoyment, once you realize that necessity of evolution, not only for the franchises, but evolution, individual, personal, evolution, we evolve with times and we mature with time. We realize that not everything is as, black or white, that sometimes there's some gray in our lives. There has to be a gray areas in our lives where we realize that not everything has to be right or wrong. There's no such definition of it. Although there's right and wrong, and there's moral things and moral dilemmas that we have to stick with some of our beliefs, there are things that also sometimes really kind of change our worldview. The way we see things are totally different from the way other people see things. So what is your opinion? I would like to hear it. Definitely there's something to talk about. I really enjoy what's happening nowadays with movies and franchises and all of that. It's some fun times, and I just have fun with it, just watching, enjoying these movies, and really dissecting the good and the bad. But just moving forward with the times as well. So what is your opinion? I would like to hear it. So don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the notification button so you're reminded of the next video. If you're listening to the podcast, you can share the podcast, or you can through iTunes, Spreaker, or Stitcher. The links are down below. And once again, God bless you and have a great weekend. talk to you again. Bye-bye.
We can make a wildfire get away.